Hello, and welcome to Crypto and Policy, our bi-weekly live broadcast that covers everything to do with crypto regulation and policy. I'm Jen Sanasi here with my co-host, Paul Hastings' partner, Renato Mariotti. Renato, a lot has happened since we last talked.
Yeah, no kidding. I think this has got to be one of the most exciting times to be in this industry, Jen. I mean, now we have a new president-elect, a new regulatory framework, a new path forward, and we actually have prediction markets that were more accurate
Mhm.
than the pollsters. And so, wow, like there's just a lot to discuss.
There sure is. On this show, we're going to unpack prediction markets, like Renato just said, where we go from here in terms of regulation in the United States. And later on, we're going to be discussing why FTX is suing Binance and former CEO CZ. So stick around for that. As always, you can comment and ask us questions. This is a live broadcast, it's on all of CoinDesk's socials. We'll be sure to get to your questions if you write them right underneath this video. Now, Renato, before we get to our first guest and talk all about prediction markets and the role that they played in the election this year, I just want to get a pulse check from you. I mean, you work with a lot of crypto clients. If I take a look at crypto Twitter, if I take a look at general sentiment, people are happy and celebratory at the potential for a more clear regulatory framework in the United States. Talk to me about what your clients are saying.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a fantastic result for the vast majority of my clients. They're excited. It ultimately means that they now have a president-elect who's listening to them, who's views them as an important constituency, who has talked about having a new regulatory framework, ending regulation by enforcement. It's apparent that Gary Gensler will no longer be the chairman of the SEC, which is very important to some of my clients. And the president elect has also talked about investing in Bitcoin and the National Reserve and all sorts of other ideas. You even have Elon Musk creating a new Doge advisory agency or whatever it is. But the point
Department of
is, there's
Government Efficiency, Renato.
yes, supposedly not a real department, but a sort of department. But in any event, regardless of what comes of it, there's a lot of excitement, and it's certainly going to be a more crypto friendly environment than we've seen in the last few years.
Yeah, that Department of Government Efficiency, of course, is being helmed, well, by Elon Musk, as President-elect Donald Trump has said, but also Vivek Ramaswamy, who you and I interviewed. So if anyone wants to hear about his views on crypto, you can go back and find that video on CoinDesk.com. All right, let's get into our first topic of the day, and that is prediction markets. Renato, you told us they emerged as one of the winners of the US election after trading on platforms suggested ahead of election day that Trump was favored to win. Kalshi was one of those exchanges receiving approval from the CFTC as an authorized designated contract market, making it the first regulated exchange dedicated to trading event contracts. Joining us now is Kalshi Chief Regulatory Officer and General Counsel, Eliezer Mishory. Hi, Ellie.
Hi, Jen. Hi, Renato. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Of course,
Absolutely.
thanks for joining us. Now, let's get right into it. Prediction markets really stood out ahead of this US election. There was a long journey for Kalshi with the CFTC to get to this place to offer these contracts to US citizens. For our audience, very quickly, take us through that journey. Let us know what happened leading up to this approval that I just mentioned.
Well, Jen, journey is made up of many different steps, some up, some down. There's always surprises. You might be familiar with a book like The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. I would say that was like a children's version, sanitized a little bit to describe the journey that we took. We started obviously engaging with the regulator back in the end of 2021, and the CFTC. We talked about our plans, why we think that a prediction market on elections is not only a good idea, it's something that's incredibly safe, something that should be embraced, and it's a very important step in the innovation of our markets and keeping our markets really ahead of the curve and really bringing about the purpose and what Congress intended for our markets. That obviously culminated in the filing of a contract that we call the Congress contract. CFTC We put out a request for comment on that contract, and ultimately we ended up pulling that contract, filed a new one that we call the control contract. The CFTC ultimately asked for comment again, very similar to the first round, and then ended up prohibiting that contract. We brought suit challenging the CFTC's determination to prohibit that contract. And, so far we won at district court. There was a contentious battle back and forth, both in the district court level and at the appellate court level, about whether or not these contracts should be stayed pending the outcome of the appeal. I think we had over 3-hour oral argument, which over a motion to stay pending appeal is relatively unprecedented. And ultimately we won. And I think the markets vindicated our contention, our belief, and really not just a belief. This is an understanding that markets work. And the way markets work is by taking information in, synthesizing it, reacting to it, and then having an output. And that output was incredibly valuable. You saw the markets going up, you saw the markets going down as the race shifted, not just on Kalshi, but across the prediction markets. As information came out, polls came out, the markets digested it and came out with what they thought was the correct probability, and the probable thing actually happened.
Ellie, I'm not going to ask you whether you're Frodo or Aragorn in your story, but it has been an epic journey for you guys to get to this point. And what I find very interesting is you have very quickly, in the span of weeks, not years, brought prediction markets into the mainstream, because after you defeated the CFTC's attempt to essentially shut down your operation, Kalshi, I believe, was one of the leading apps in the run up to the election on the the iOS App Store for people who have Apple devices, and it spawned a lot of discussion online, and people now are looking back to see whether or not and how the predictions were actually more accurate, as I mentioned before we brought you in, than pollsters and other supposed professionals. First, I'm curious. I kind of have a couple questions. One is, what do you make of the amazing and intense reaction to the product? But also, why is the market so accurate?
Renato, those are two great questions. I think the first question is, it was amazing to see. Something that you've dedicated your nights and your days, and then your nights again, sometimes in a string exactly like that. To see people actually using it and to see the benefit that brings is amazing. We were the number one app. It was an inch up, and we were very excited as we slowly overtook Meta or the next one. And then in finance, we made it to the top, and then we made it to the general list, and then we were the number one app. And that lasted even after the election, which was amazing. I think that the popularity really comes from the fact that there's a lot of news sources out there, and you need something to sift through the noise. And a prediction market really can just sift through the noise. They take the inputs and they give you an output. You also can participate in it, which is something you can't do on traditional media. You can get into a Twitter battle with somebody, or you can yell at somebody on social media, or you can just say, you know what, I know better than this person. I think I have an edge, and I'm actually going to do something about that. I'm going to make some profit from this edge that I have. I think that's an incredibly wonderful thing to be able to do. I obviously can't do that. I'm very interested in watching what the market thinks. That's a fascinating thing to see. And I think the markets perform differently than polls, because I think they play a different role than polls. A poll asks you, what do you want? Like, what's your goal? What's your desired outcome? And that's sometimes very different than what you think the actual outcome is going to be. So there's a lot of translation that pollsters have to do. And they're phenomenal at it, and they're very important, and they're important pieces of data information. But they're certainly not the end all. And what you get from a market is people that are distilling all these various different polls. And it's not just the polls. It's people speaking to their neighbors and seeing, hey, my neighbor over here who, I don't know, is not somebody who you would expect to be voting for a certain candidate, this cycle is voting for that candidate. That tells me something. That's not a piece of information you're going to get from the news, but it's a piece of information that you can get from your life. You can distill that and say, hey, I think that this candidate's chances are significantly higher than maybe what the polls are indicating. And then you have that edge, and you can act on that. You can really express an opinion on that in a profitable way.
some of the critics who were speaking out throughout the case with the CFTC said, do we really want to enable people to kind of gamify election results? Like, is this the best thing for society? How would you respond to those people?
Well, I would say we took concerns about election integrity extremely seriously. We spent about 3 years walking up and down the halls of Congress, speaking to people that are experts in the field, speaking to universities, speaking to elected officials, finding out what people's concerns are and how we can address them. The end product looks simple, but that's because we did a great job engineering the back end on this. We have a great team. It's a concern that we certainly have. There's another side to that story, though, also, which is when you have an engaged electorate, when you have people who feel like they have information, when you have people that are interested in participating in the market and go out to learn about the candidates and learn about what they think the chances are, you could also end up with a significantly more engaged electorate and a more engaged voter population, which is an excellent thing. I think everybody would agree. Even in a fractured society, everybody wants everybody to be participating in the elections. So I think it can actually bring about as these markets continue to grow, I think they can actually be a significant boon for the whole overall election and democracy picture.
One question I have, is that as somebody who observed very closely the fight with the CFTC, as you know, Ellie, I have many fights of my own with the CFTC on a regular basis on behalf of my clients. I definitely noticed the views expressed by certain politicians, most notably Elizabeth Warren, their concerns, right, regarding prediction markets. So I want to kind of throw up a couple of issues, and I'm interested in your explanation for our audience about how prediction markets can deal with that. One is insider information. Of course, that's an issue in traditional markets as well. I've handled on both as a prosecutor and on the defense side insider trading cases, but there's a whole slew of sources of information about politics, and it's not always that secret in the way it can be in a publicly traded company. There's less regulation of that. And then second of all, a concern that perhaps someone who makes a big bet in an election might have an incentive to try to muddy with the results, perhaps challenge the results, overturn the results, try to do something that would be dishonest. How is Kalshi? What's your position regarding some of those concerns?
Yeah, it is interesting, the types of concerns and the source of the concerns, I think are very telling. A lot of the concerns, like when you brought up insider trading, that has very little to do with the actual election side of the market. That's a consumer protection concern. And as you said, that's a concern that can come up on any market. Why does that come up in the election markets? Well, I think a lot of the backlash is the wrong word, a lot of the opposition, which actually was not great at all. It was very minor opposition. A lot of the opposition comes just from a sense of, I don't like markets, and I certainly don't like markets when they have anything to do with elections. So it's either a distrust of markets in general, and then you combine that with elections, and then you end up just looking for reasons why you don't like it. So insider trading, let's grab insider trading. There's no actual impact on the election result from that. It's a consumer protection problem. And that's a consumer protection problem that we as an exchange take extremely seriously. We want to make sure that all of our members and everybody who's participating on the exchange is doing so in a safe and fair manner. And of course, like you said, insider trading is nothing new to this market. It's the same insider trading that you have with every market. A lot of the distinctions that people like to draw between these types of event markets and other markets are very illusory and actually fall apart when you start to look at them. Second question, about mudding up the waters. It's interesting. We didn't exist in 2020. There was a lot of mud that was kicked up in the waters after the election in 2020. I think there's a lot of incentive for people to care deeply about the outcome of an election. I think that buying an election contract, if let's say somebody wants to muddy the waters or has the ability to do so, a federally regulated election market is probably the worst place to do it. You're literally building a paper trail for any crimes you're about to commit like neatly packaged with a bow, handing it over to the federal government with, "Hi, here's my motive." Most people, I think probably everybody that would have the ability to manipulate a market would go somewhere dark, or they would never be seen and be able to profit over there. On our markets, especially, also, keep in mind, this from traditional futures. Let's assume people aren't trying to be nefarious and manipulate the outcome of an election. But you have somebody who's, deeply invested, and then there might be a concern, oh, shoot, they lost money. So now they're going to, kick up a rabble. Futures contracts, derivative contracts, serve to smooth out risk, right? They're not usually manufacturing risk. People already face a significant amount of risk from elections. The crypto industry is going to look very different under President Trump than it would have looked under President Harris. There was a lot of risk that people were facing. Your audience was facing significant risks. The participation on election contracts is not going to increase that risk. It can serve to mitigate that risk. And it can also serve as a source of truth, which makes these types of creating confusion and FUD much more difficult, because you actually have a source. And it's very hard to say, oh, the market is biased. It's easy to say, oh, this journalist is biased. But to say, oh, well, all 3 million people participating on this market are idiots, it's possible. But it's harder to say that.
Ellie, I want to change the course of our conversation just a little bit. We are talking about Kalshi, prediction markets. Something related to prediction markets that many people are talking about today is the FBI raid of the New York home of Polymarket CEO Shane Copeland. Polymarket, definitely a competitor, not available in the United States. As the chief regulatory officer at Kalshi, how are you looking at what's unfolding here and making sense of it as it pertains to the business that you're doing and prediction markets as a whole?
Yeah, well, Jen, I'll just start out by saying I don't look at Polymarket as a competitor. We're a prediction market. We're in the same space. We're not that big. Like, the prediction market space is not that big. We got catapulted into the national limelight with this election, which is excellent. And it's something that's going to be great for prediction markets, because prediction markets really are the future. We've seen their power. We've seen that they work. Polymarket, Predicted has been around. Predicted was my first taste of a prediction market. We're all really in the same boat trying to build this together. And as you said, Polymarket is not for U.S. people, and we're actually, somebody who's not a U.S. person isn't allowed to participate on Kalshi's election markets. So we actually have very distinct, almost no overlap in terms of our customer base. So, we wish Shane and Polymarket the best.
So, we talked a moment ago about some of the concerns that politicians and others had. And I think one argument that I'll just observe, one argument that I think, what Kalshi can make is, essentially, if you're going to have prediction markets are going to exist, whether the government regulates them or not, and having a federally regulated one is better. But I guess, one thing I found fascinating, Ellie, about your answer, is you talked about hedging. And, you're right that traditionally, a lot of financial instruments are used to manage risk. And many companies do have risks that are election based, and it's not just crypto, right? I mean, for example, who heads up the FTC would have a massive impact on certain companies, right? So, to what extent does Kalshi view itself as a place to hedge risk versus a market that is there for people who are interested in understanding and predicting who's going to be the election, or placing a bet for or against their favorite politician?
Well, Renato, this gets into old time. What's the purpose of the markets? I forget which senator it was in 1920 who got up there and, futures markets are a den of gamblers and rah, 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 rah. Right? There's really two things that happen. This is all on our court briefs, which our brief is due in court, I think, tomorrow. But these are things that we've said beforehand, so I don't think I'm blowing any privilege over here with this. All right. So You ask a few great questions. A market like Kalshi is an excellent place to hedge. You talk about risks on the election. The CFTC's prohibition said that election risk is too attenuated for people to hedge. I mean, with all due respect, whoever wrote that is asinine. Just look at the news on CNBC, on CNN, on MSNBC in the months leading up to the election, and right now, through now, what's the impact that Trump has on this industry? What will it look like under Harris? What will control of Congress do? What will this individual senator, Sherrod Brown? I think we would all agree over here that this SEC and the crypto space will develop very differently now that Senator Brown is not going to be the head of financial services. I think that's obvious. It's almost, unbelievable to think that the CFTC actually believes that position. I, for one, do not believe that the CFTC actually believes that. It's such a dumb position. There's no way they actually believe that. So there's look, just like a green energy startup, anybody in the energy field, anybody in the health field, who do you think in the health field right now is not wondering, is Bobby Kennedy going to become something in the government that impacts my job? Like, everybody's thinking about that, from like Merck and Pfizer all the way on down to some research lab, right? Everybody's thinking about what's going to be the next thing. I mean, pizza chains are probably wondering if they have to replace their cheese, right? So there's massive implications to everything that happens. We all pay taxes, or at least we're all supposed to be paying taxes, right? So there's massive implications to elections, and they can certainly be hedged, and they should be hedged. But every market is made up of three things, right? You have your hedgers, you have your speculators, and they provide the liquidity. And this is just as true on Kalshi as it's true on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, on any exchange, really. You have your hedgers, you've got your speculators, and you've got your people who are traders. And they know how to take an edge and express an opinion. And expressing an opinion has actually been historically, like if we look in the congressional record from the 70s and the 80s, given as one of the purposes of the futures markets. Anecdotally, people like to say that the orange juice futures markets predict the weather better than the meteorologists. People are good at it. And that's a very legitimate role for the market. It's not only a legitimate role for a market to allow somebody to express their opinion and be able to take advantage of what they know. There's a big societal benefit to that, because now the marketplace has another data point that they can use. And frankly, I don't understand the CFTC's resistance to this. Why would you not want the market to have more data? The goal of the CFTC should be to increase market data, to increase transparency, to give the marketplace more knowledge, not try to restrict it to a select few. Shutting down these types of markets would mean that only a small number of people have access to the type of data and analysis that we ended up that the whole world was able to get. And they're the ones who can now use that data when they're looking at making hiring decisions or investment decisions or any other financial decision or business decision. Now the world has that, and that's something that the CFTC and really, I think all markets should be excited about.
All right, Ellie, we are going to have to wrap it up, but I just want to remind our audience that you can ask questions. So if you have a question for Ellie and you want to ask it, you should do that now, because we're going to start wrapping it up with Ellie and send him on his way. I want to talk to you about where we go from here with prediction markets, right? The narrative really blew up around the elections. We now know who the president-elect is for 2025. Talk to me about Kalshi's vision for the future beyond elections.
Kalshi started out with a very deep conviction that the best way to grow these markets, well, let me back up. Kalshi started out with a deep conviction that these markets are valuable. These markets not only are valuable to the individuals, these markets are valuable to anybody who cares about any of the topics, be they something like elections, which everybody cares about, most everybody cares about, be they something as very niche as will there be a room temperature superconductor that probably everybody should care about, but only a very small select few people will care about, or how many solar flares will there be, or anything else that's meaningful to a group of people that can support a market. That's a deep conviction. And we also marry that deep conviction with the belief that to do this well, we have to do this in a regulated and a lawful and engaged way with the regulator. And going forward from here, I'm very excited to be continuing to engage with the CFTC, obviously with the Hill, with new leadership, and continuing to just bring that vision of having a market for everybody that everybody can participate on and everybody can benefit from.
All right, Ellie, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining the show. It was such a pleasure unpacking prediction markets, the future of prediction markets with you. We hope to have you back again soon.
Jen, Renato, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I love your show. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Kalshi, Chief Regulatory Officer, and General Counsel Eliezer Mishory. All right, Renato, it is just you and I now. And I brought this story up during our discussion with Ellie, but I want to bring it up to you. We learned that the Polymarket CEO's home was raided in New York City by the FBI. Talk to me about what you're taking away from this story. Help me make sense of what's going on here and what might happen in the future.
Sure. And by the way, that's why this is such a perfect guest, right? This is what an amazing storm that we have right now with prediction markets in this election. Look, we don't know a lot publicly about what's going on, but we know a few things. All right. So first of all, when we say the word raid, what that means is that there was a search warrant that was executed at the home of the CEO of Polymarket. And you don't need to be a lawyer to know that when the feds come and execute a search warrant at your home, that's really bad news for you. It means you're probably going to get arrested. Okay, so that's I would say that's a bottom line. It means that technically, to get specific about it, it means that a federal judge determined that there was a good reason to believe that a federal crime was committed, and that evidence of that crime is in the home of Polymarket CEO. Okay, so that's definitely a problem. I'm sure he's got great lawyers and is trying to deal with that situation. So now the harder question is, what's the crime? Now we don't know a lot publicly, but this is just a guess. Thus far I've told you things that I can be reasonably certain we know.
Mm-hmm.
But a guess would be the Polymarket. We just heard a moment ago from our guest Jen. The Polymarket's supposed to not be operating in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get in a lot of trouble if you're supposed to be operating outside of the United States, but actually you're taking steps to facilitate U.S. persons participating in your product and participating in your platform. And I wouldn't be surprised if that has a lot to do with the criminal activity that's been alleged.
Well, I have a little tidbit of information to add to what you've just said there. According to Bloomberg News, the DOJ is investigating Polymarket for allowing U.S.-based users on the site, and electronic devices were what the feds were looking for when they went to Shane's home on Wednesday morning. So it sounds like your guess you could be onto something, Renato.
It's almost like I do this for a living, Jen.
Yeah.
So yes, so that's what I figured. And so there you go. And the reality is, yes, they're looking for devices. You have to, in the United States, you have to get a search warrant to search anyone's electronic devices. So if they want to seize your iPhone, or they want to search your cloud-based storage, or they want to seize your laptop and search that and do an image of that, they need a search warrant. But the bottom line is they have very substantial evidence to get to this point. I wouldn't be surprised if that involves communications that help U.S. persons use VPNs and other methods to bypass protections that are in place to ensure that only foreigners are accessing the Polymarket site and purchasing the instruments that they offer on that site.
We've seen this with other crypto-related firms. U.S. enforcement agencies come after them. And then there's almost like a knock-on effect of global regulators starting to look into that same firm. I know recently we learned that French regulators are probing Polymarket. Given your experience, do you think this is maybe a trend we're going to see post-election with various different prediction markets?
Yeah, I think there's a term, another professional term we use is piling on. And that's often the way it's discussed is once one regulator smells blood, then suddenly like all these piranhas, they come and try to pick you dry. So yes, it is a problem. As often I have to try to help clients navigate like several different issues at the same time. And I would not be surprised if that happens to Polymarket here. I do think it's an interesting thing, Jen, that to look at the different approach that Polymarket took versus Kalshi, which was very careful, was went and tried to get regulated by the CFTC, and now in a Trump administration may reap the benefits of that. For all we know, a new Trump CFTC may take a very different approach towards Kalshi in 2025.
Mhm.
And they may end up directly competing with Polymarket or overtaking Polymarket because their strategy, while bearing some costs, ultimately, appears to be paying off.
Now, I've asked you this question before. I'm going to ask it again because I think it's relevant to all of our listeners who are listening to the show, the people who are watching the show right now. There are various different crypto firms that are currently in litigation or currently have a pending suit with either the SEC or the CFTC. We now have a new administration coming in 2025. Do we think that some of those cases are going to go away with a new SEC, a new CFTC, or do they have to get to a certain point? Like, how is this going to work?
Wow. Great question. I wrote a piece several months ago, Jen, surviving regulation by enforcement. And a big part of that was biding time until there's a change in the winds. Well, that change has come or is about to come in January 20th, 2025. So, but what we don't know is exactly how quickly that change is going to come. I mean, the president-elect has floated a number of names for a number of different positions. None of them thus far are SEC chairman. And his priorities are focused on things like migrants and other issues he's very focused on, rather than the justice. He's at the Justice Department, what he's calling weaponization, not as much on this issue of the SEC. So it may take several months, and people who are litigating against the SEC may need to continue to deliberately take their time in these lawsuits until there's actual change. But I do think there will be change. I think we can expect a new SEC chair. I think we can expect some new commissioners. I think we can expect new heads of enforcement, and that leadership will cause a change in approach. And so I think, if you're litigating against the SEC, now is not the time to speed up your lawsuit. Now is the time to take a more deliberate approach, consider your options, and see what happens because over time we're going to learn a lot more in terms of the timeline and what change there will be in the Trump administration.
Well, President-elect Trump said he's gonna fire Gary Gensler on day one, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see if that happens.
Indeed. Or Gary Gensler may quit beforehand.
Yeah.
But for now, you'll probably have some placeholder person as an acting chairperson or something along those lines until we get a new chair that's appointed. You still have the same director of enforcement. So we need to see exactly how this shakes out. Trump has to get his own people in there
Mhm.
in order for there to be actual change. But that may come very soon. We'll see.
We will see. All right, let's move on to our final story. Before we do that, I just want to remind everyone who's watching to leave questions for us, comments. We will try to get to them during the live broadcast. We are live across all of CoinDesk's social channels, and we appreciate you continuing to watch. Last time I checked, we had over 20,000 views so far on the video, which is awesome. So thank you so much for watching and sticking with us as we talk about all of these crypto-related policy and regulation stories. All right. Last one for the day. FTX is suing crypto exchange Binance and its former CEO, CZ, for $1.8 billion. FTX cited a 2021 transaction where Binance, CZ, and others exited their investment in FTX, selling a 20% stake in the platform back to the company. The FTX estate alleges that the share repurchase was funded by Alameda Research through a combination of the company's and Binance's exchange tokens and Binance's dollar-pegged stablecoin. They are saying that it is a constructive fraudulent transfer. Renato, take it away. Talk to us about what's going on here. What is a constructive fraudulent transfer? And could this net the FTX estate almost $2 billion?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm going to say I want to be very careful to say that I don't know exact. My firm, I'm certain, represents people that are somehow involved in this or somehow related to it. I don't know who and what we represent, and I also am not using any inside information here. Okay, so reading the same articles you are, Jen. Here's just some high level takeaways. So FTX collapsed very famously, massive moment in our industry. And this transaction is essentially a transaction in which Binance got its money out, or it got paid out before everything fell to crap, so to speak. And it's a lot of money, right? $1.8 billion dollars, or close to $1.8 billion dollars. And so it's not surprising to me that people are questioning that transaction and challenging that transaction. FTX now is essentially an entity that exists to further the interests of its creditors and others. So it now is going after this money and going after Binance and making claims and making arguments because they want to recover some of that money, even if it's a fraction of it. A fraction of $1.8 billion is a lot of money. And so I think this is going to be a very high stakes fight. Obviously, Binance has 1.8 billion reasons not to just agree with them. And so I think this is going to be a fight that we're going to hear about for some time. But this is ultimately, likely a likely result whenever there's civil litigation like this. Is there some sort of resolution, and the FTX, FTX gets some amount of money back, and that ultimately flows to various creditors and so on.
I mean, the FTX estate has been pretty successful at clawing back funds. This has gone on for quite a while. I mean, we've been talking about FTX since late 2021 when the exchange collapsed. Renato, how much how long do you think this is going to take for this entire thing to be resolved where you and I are not talking about FTX every other week?
This is going to go on for so long that it'll be impressive if our show outlasts this saga. There are
Wow.
still people fighting over Bernie Madoff claims now, today,
Yeah.
this year. So it will happen for some time, Jen. But one thing I will say, and I actually think, FTX was almost like a footnote on this show today. This was an awesome show because you and I had so much that we could talk about, that we
Hmm.
got to sift through and find the most exciting and interesting things to talk about. I think
Hmm.
this is one of the most exciting times, if not the most exciting time we've ever had in crypto, and particularly in crypto law and policy. So I think this is exciting. And from my perspective, it's good to see FTX and that whole debacle as something that's more in the rearview mirror, and something that we're dealing with the aftermath of, rather than something that still dominates people's view of the industry.
I agree with you. When it happens, I remember people thinking, can the industry recover from this? I think you look at the markets today, you look at what's happening today, how the election panned out, and the industry, I think, definitely has recovered. And you're absolutely right, Renato. It is an incredibly exciting time to be reporting on this industry, to be hosting this show with you and talking about all the regulatory and policy shifts that we're going to see in the coming months. And so I'm just really excited to be doing this show with you. And I know that we are going to have a ton to unpack come 2025. So thank you for co hosting with me.
Absolutely. Thank you. This has been, I thought, our most interesting show to date, and we're really taking off here. So please reach out to us if you have comments, if you think there are guests that we should have on the show. We're interested in your views. We're interested in making this show even better because, boy, we got a lot to cover and a lot to discuss in the weeks and months to come.
And don't tell any one of our previous guests that Renato said that this was the most interesting show. I would just like to echo what Renato just said. Thank you so much for watching the show. Please share your feedback, share your comments, share your guest recommendations with us. We are here every second Thursday. So that means we won't be here next Thursday, but we will be here the one after that. We hope you have a great day. I'm Jen Sanasi. Thank you to my co-host, Renato Mariotti, and we will see you in 2 weeks.